You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Well, Brendan, it's not like I haven't asked you already, but what do you think about this limited format so far? Because for me, this looks like it might be potentially the best limited format we've ever had. It looks awesome.
Well, keen to get your thoughts on what makes you want to make that call already. I think that from a design standpoint, it looks very cool. Dragons are cool. The Illusionist is a great take on the class. I think we talked a bit about the concept of this class actually back in. I think it was right after Monarch. We were talking about this idea of like a summoner class that would utilize allies a bit more, and looks like that is just going to be a version of Illusionist. So. Looks really cool. The Ninja, of course, Ninja finally getting its really second talented hero, or first talented hero, but second Ninja for Classic Constructed. Really exciting. And then of course the Ice Wizard, which we haven't seen a lot of yet, but I'm still holding out hopes for that class. I'm very excited.
It looks good. Yep. So, am I doing the intro? Like, what's happening here?
Yeah. What do you mean?
Okay, cool. All right, I'll edit it out. I'm gonna keep going. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I think it looks potentially very strong and constructed and limited. And on that note, this week is about limited as we gear up towards the calling in Vegas and Sydney that we'll both be attending, and the world premiere, my world premiere being in 24 hours from now, basically, which is super exciting from when we record. Hitting that Friday premiere for Uprising, pre-release coming up, and then the imminent release of Uprising, which is going to lead us into a limited season. So this week we're diving into approaching a new limited format. We're going to be talking about, how to approach a new format as it is, things to look for, a bit of tips and tricks, evaluating cards, building decks, draft versus sealed. And we're going to talk about Uprising in the context of limited as well, in preparation of our set review next week, Brendan. Take this as, I guess, a bit of a prelude to our set review as we talk through some of the mechanics and what we think so far of the three heroes for this limited format.
Yeah.
But Brendan, first, this week in Flesh and Blood, what have you been up to?
So actually, I didn't play any ProQuest. I didn't play any events. Just been testing Blitz. I had a bit of a busy week last week, so I couldn't travel on that Friday to go up to Oklahoma on Saturday. So I know I talked a lot of smack about taking the Oklahoma trophy, but it looks like I'm gonna have to snatch it from them, the Team Covenant boys at the finals of this Uprising or this Team Blitz event in Vegas. So I will get my chance, but unfortunately was not able to play Flesh and Blood this weekend. But I did get more Blitz testing in. I think that we had some ideas about the format, and for the most part, those are reinforced. Well, I did have to backtrack on some things.
Yeah, Brendan, how good's Kasai?
Still not that good. It's okay. I've heard from a few people talking about its matchup into Oldhim. I've seen it not be successful many times, both from our internal testing, but also watching the people that are specifically kind of pushing that strategy. I watched it not be successful live. I was watching like a Discord channel, so I still don't know if I believe in it. Is Kasai good? Is it an okay third deck? Like, is it an okay just like average deck you can put on the boot? Probably. Yeah, it's probably okay. The format slowed down quite a bit.
Yeah. We just did a Patreon podcast over the weekend, and we talked about sort of the top 6, sort of 7 decks in the format, and Kasai is in there. And I think my testing, and so far we're just playing games. I mean, I could say testing. To be honest, my preparation for the calling is more being playing games, which is not something I usually do. Just trying to get reps in and understand the format, and then some focus testing. But yeah, playing games with Kasai, playing against Kasai, definitely better than I thought in terms of I think some of the more refined lists that we're seeing now as well. I think are much improved and doing the sort of things that I'd want to do with Kasai and pushing breakpoints that are more relevant. So yeah, I think in terms of I expect to see Kasai this weekend, and I don't think it's a bad choice. I think it makes sense. Will we be playing it? No, I don't think it's going to be one of the 3 decks that we sleeve up this weekend from myself, and I don't think either from you, is it, Brendan?
No, we're definitely not playing it. There's 2 decks that could maybe be the third deck, and yeah, I don't know. It's really hard, the direction you take. I know we talked about this a lot in the Patreon pod, but whether you want that third deck to be something that has very good matchups other than Oldhim, or you want something that has a particularly good matchup into Oldhim and it's kind of average into everything else, maybe struggles a bit against the aggro decks, etc., or not one of our choices, but you could pick that Kasai that's kind of just has game into everything. I think we're going to go for something that has a bit of game into Oldhim and is just sort of an okay deck, that being Rhinar.
Yeah, a bit more polarized, less polarizing.
Mm-hmm.
A bit more polarizing, rather. My week in Flesh and Blood, I did get to a Pro Quest. So I played 2 Pro Quests this season, one weekend before last and one this weekend just gone. Played Dash, the first one, and then busted out the chain list that I would have been my PT chain list if I had audibled to chain rather than to Kano. And managed to go undefeated into the final, split the final so that one of our locals could take the invite, and of course I took the gold for it, was what I was after, and I got very lucky and opened a Courage of Bladehold, so definitely cannot complain. Tell you what, I played a mirror in I think the quarterfinal or the semi-final, and my opponent played like multiple Shadow Puppetries against me, and I was like, oh yeah, I just reinforced how much I don't like that card.
Don't like it. You think it's bad?
I think it's fine. It's just I think it's less impressive than it used to be in Chain. So it was just funny, just kind of reinforce it because I hadn't played Chain in any event, just in testing. So it was quite interesting. And then likewise, just reps of Blitz and getting games in and doing some testing and kind of done now. Really, I've got editor Dave who edits our gameplay videos staying with me at the moment. So I'm kind of done with testing. We're just hanging out and doing a few things over the next couple of days and nights, and then we've got Uprising World Premiere tomorrow, and then the calling. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, I've got Vegas tomorrow. I'm excited. I'm flying out. Have a chill Thursday, and then go play that. I'm super happy that we have these world premieres nowadays before the set reviews. Cool. It makes the set reviews, well, obviously, they're really cool. They're really fun, but for the set reviews, it gives us a lot of context in terms of like what's good, what's not. I feel like we get a very good grasp of the format beforehand. Anyway, Hayden, it's a big week for the news. Obviously, Uprising has started its major spoilers, but outside of that, we got a few other things in the headline.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, to start, as you say, Uprising preview season is in full swing. If you haven't been checking out the previews, I mean, where have you been hiding? You've been under a rock. So head to fabtcg.com. You can check out the card gallery. Discord, of course, the Flesh and Blood Discord always has the previews up to date, hot to the minute as they come through, including a box break that just happened a few hours before we went live. So me and Brendan frantically been trying to catch up on the latest cards that have been previewed through this box break. And our preview went up the other day. And as we said, we weren't talking smack. We have one of the best cards in the set, if not the best card in the set, in the form of Crown of Providence, legendary generic equipment, and what a thing it is. Go and check out our video. Our preview video is up on YouTube. You can find that. And, let us know what you think in the comments. Will you be playing Crown of Providence, or are you a skullcap truther and Crown of Providence is going nowhere near your deck? I've heard it's worse than Silver Palms, apparently.
Crown of Providence is my litmus test for a good fab player. I'm not going to say what the correct answer is, but it's pretty funny. There's a huge divide on this card, and I think that I haven't had much of a divide in like this. I don't know, the people that I test with, or nobody's really come at me, but like definitely online, I've seen some people that are very for it and some people that are very against it. But I think the card is it's not bad.
Very strong effect. Elsewhere in the news, callings this weekend, as we say, world premiere. And of course, today we're diving in on Uprising with that as well. I'm going to be in Sydney, as I said. I'm going to pack some of these Herald of Rebirths in my bag. So if you are coming to the Calling Sydney and you're keen on getting yourself one of these extended art foil Herald of Rebirths, come and say hello. Tell me what you're enjoying about Uprising through the day on Friday. I'll have these on tomorrow with me on Friday. Tell me what, how you're crushing people with your Uprising deck, or you're learning the format or the cards you like, and I'll hit you up with one of these Herald of Rebirths, and I'll even have a playmat for someone lucky on the day as well. So make sure to come and say hello in Sydney. And I mean, just looking forward to playing. I woke up this morning, Brendan, and the calling's whatever. Cool, can't wait. But this Uprising World Premiere, I'm actually like fizzing for. So can't wait. Elsewhere, Pro Quest Season 2 is wrapped up. Congratulations to all the winners and invitees for France. Of course, XP rating cutoff was on Sunday as well. So we have all of our invites for Lille. If you made the cut, congratulations. I think those will be going up either, I would assume, by the end of the week or early next week, so that everyone confirms exactly where they finished up in those 90-day and lifetime XPs. And we say goodbye to Star of the Show and Chain. And good riddance, Brendan, or maybe a shit a tear?
I mean, I think it's going to have more impact than Uprising. These were two very...
That's a big call.
I don't know. These are two very, very dominant heroes, specifically Star of the Show. kind of shut down a lot of the rest of the game design, I think it has a chance to flourish now. I'm slightly worried, not really worried, but I think there's going to be a big dichotomy between Illusionist and Guardian in the coming format. We'll see how, the new Wizard and Ninja play into that.
Yep.
But Star of the Show and Chain rotating out is very exciting. I think it's probably the most excited I've been for Flesh and Blood Classic Constructed almost since its inception.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I'm always like really hesitant to say because I think I got burned with how I thought Tales of Aria was going to play out. But the fact that we do see Chain leaving and, the bans that impacted Viserai, and then of course Star of the Show hitting out, I do agree with you. It feels like we're going to see the biggest shakeup because of Uprising and the Living Legend status as well. Like, could Fi be the kind of aggro deck that comes in to balance out some of the Illusionist stuff? Or it's going to be super interesting to see. Can't wait till we get into Road to National season and see what spice people come up with in week 1. I'll definitely be in the lab in a few weeks' time, I imagine. Otherwise, Brendan, Uprising OP season announcements were made last week as well. We have some callings. So Utrecht is back on for the 22nd of July, and Singapore is happening on August 20th. Both are hybrid formats, draft and classic constructed, so allow people to prep for Pro Tour Lille, which is, I think, super exciting. I think it's a really cool idea to do. I've never really seen that in other games where they kind of have that split format at a level like this. Well, not in Magic, I guess. I'm looking off Magic. Like, a split format was usually only reserved for PTs and Nationals. So, yeah, I'm glad that we get more of that because I think it's such a fun format to have split and also test the kind of skill across the two formats. I think I think that's a good thing for the game because I do think limited should be important, and we talked about that in the podcast a couple of weeks ago.
I'm pretty jealous of the people that are playing those callings. I think that it's fantastic preparation for that Pro Tour. Like,
I'm going to Singapore the week before, so I'm going to go via Singapore and then on my way to Lille.
Yeah, I don't think anything else. You can do your internal testing, do your local testing, do draft camp, all that. But going to a premier professional event where people are legitimately trying to win with that exact format before the Pro Tour, that's a big advantage.
Preparation.
To close out here, just want to say thank you to all the Arsenal Pass patrons. Saw a lot of support in the, since the Pro Tour. We came out with quite a few deck techs. We had the Kano deck tech, the Dash deck tech, and the Prism deck tech, which we had Tyler Horspool join us for. We will be continuing that throughout these competitive seasons, particularly, reaching out to, I think, established pro players that have an identity behind like a certain archetype or a class and having them come on and do, a deck tech and just give out information, give out deck lists. I think that it was really successful. So again, thank you to Tyler Horspool for coming on, and we'll look to do it more in the future. Before that is going to be limited. So we do have our limited set review, and I'm sure Hayden's going to come out with one of his patented archetypes, limited archetypes videos, or top 5 cards, something spicy. So keep your eye out for that in the future.
Always. Okay, Brendan. What's that? Smell that?
My nose. I got my nose a little clogged, but what's that?
It's time for the Commander Cookout.
Yes, sir.
Question this week comes from our very own Gotha, from our community manager, the Shining Light, that often will reply to your comments or be putting up he's our Twitter guy for Arsenal Pass. Got a question in this week, so I said it's okay, we'll accept it, we'll take the question. Traditionally in tabletop card games, deck lists are seen as the premier technology in the information race. A wrinkle in this, Flesh and Blood introduces a variety of game plan decisions on a macro level. A full block-out fatigue plan can be played with the same 60 to 80 cards as an all-out aggressive plan or a more tempo read-the-room plan. How much more or less important is the game plan versus a deck list? If you could only have one, which would it be and why? I think this is a super great question. I think this is something that came up over the Pro Tour time, as we saw a lot of deck lists that had some similarities, right, Brendan? But the play styles and the kind of game plans and the how people were playing into certain matchups was quite varied, and only a couple of cards could change that, which I thought was quite an interesting thing to note.
Yeah, so there's just this question here. If you had to pick one, which one would you pick? I think that via like Arsenal Pass ideology, I should be saying game plan, but I would probably take deck list only because I remember when I was at Orlando in Nationals, I kind of scrubbed out of Nationals and I went to the calling the next day and I asked Tarek for his deck list, and that deck pretty much has one game plan, and it was very effective. So I think if you have like a really strong linear aggressive deck, the deck list is enough because you do have sort of a singular game plan. That being said, you take a chain deck or from this last ProQuest season, and you go in there planning to just kind of aggro people down, run into a few fatigue matches, and don't have a game plan for it. It's going to be a disaster. Same thing with things like Prism. Prism has to adjust her game plans based on who she's playing against. Whether it's one of the Guardians, it's going to be one of the slower decks. It could be Star of the Show, or one of these hyper aggressive decks that are kind of some of your bad masters. You have to change up how you play. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting choice, but I might choose Decklist just because of the recency bias to prevalent and very successful linear aggressive decks.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because one begets the other, I think, a little bit in terms of
it does
definitely. Less so in other games, but like in terms of if you take the chain list that Michael Hamilton played and was very similar to the list I played this previous weekend. Like it was revolving around not breaking the combat chain. Like just played Lead the Charges, didn't play Shadow Puppetries, played Void Wraiths, like more block 3s and some extra blood debt that you could jam in there. And in terms of like the way that played out, the game plan resulted in that deck list coming out. I guess that's kind of the deck list was the product of that game plan to an extent. And sometimes it can go vice versa, right? So they're always going to go somewhat hand in hand. But I think if at the sort of like higher level, maybe you say callings, pro tours, whatever it might be, I think the game plans are more important because I think you can do pretty well with a reasonably refined deck list and really, really good plans. I think you will struggle with the most refined deck list if you don't even know what your game plans are heading into stuff. Yeah. So I'll flip you. I'll say the other side, but I agree. It's actually pretty close. Although I think it ebbs and flows as we go through Flesh and Blood. And like I say, it really depends on where we probably are in the cycle of the meta as well. So early on, I think deck lists are like king, right? But I think as you get into the meta, I think game plans become more important, to be honest.
Yeah, and I agree with you as well. A good example of a deck that is, I guess, a good deck list, but is useless without a game plan is the Kano deck. That deck is... has very, very below average turn cycles if you are playing a fair game and not the combo. So yeah, definitely one leads into another for sure. But an interesting concept is try to figure out which one you might pick.
Yeah, awesome question there from Gother, and I think that's going to continue to be an important piece. I mean, I think for us, we think both are important, and that's why we do deck lists and we do the full deck guide and sideboard plan and everything, talk about matchups, because I think one without the other is kind of often not enough and makes no sense. So, that's why even in our deck tech videos, we try and talk about what the key game plans are and what the core of this deck and what the ethos is trying to do with the game plans. So, yeah, I think really interesting. If you do want to get your question in for the Command and Cookout, you can drop those to us in an email, arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. Tweet at us, direct message us. You can drop them in our Discord if you're part of the community Discord, our patrons Discord, or drop them to Brendan at Las Vegas if you want to. Whatever you want to do, get your questions in for the Command and Cookout. All right, Brendan, we're going to go on to, I guess, the first part of our main topic, which is approaching a new limited format. But first of all, I want to set the stage for what is our limited review next week, and also the fact that we are approaching the Uprising limited format. So let's look at some of the Uprising previews so far, I guess, in terms of the previous season. I want to focus more on limited here, but we can talk a little bit about constructed, of course, and just talk a little bit about, I guess, first of all, let's start from a macro level, and then let's talk a little bit about some of the specifics and stuff that are in the set as well, maybe a couple of cards. But what have we seen so far, Brennan? Well, we started off, of course, seeing the Wizard Ice cards, the Icelander cards early on. We got the early spoilers there. Really interesting, right? And, of course, we saw the first dragon. From then, the previous season has been a lot about Draconic to start with, and Illusionists up front, and then Ninja over the past day or so. And then we've now seen some more cards across all three classes, across all three of the heroes, with this box break that's just happened, and we've tried to catch up with some of these cards. We know there's generics in the set. We know there's, of course, the talented Draconic cards. There's ice cards in the set. So the set looks really interesting and well-rounded, which is kind of the first thing I take away. I want to talk through some of the mechanics, Brendan, and I'm going to say what they are, and then I want to just hear your opinion on what you think about these mechanics in the context of, I guess, limited, but also the game as it is, in terms of constructed as well. So the first one we've got is Quell. So Quell is a keyword ability on equipment, and it says if your hero would be dealt. So you have Quell 1. We have Quell 1. If your hero would be dealt damage, you may pay 1 to prevent 1 of that damage. If you do, destroy X equipment. So I'm looking at Heatwave in particular, which is the Draconic Ninja equipment arms.
Mm-hmm.
Destroy Heatwave at the beginning of your end phase. So effectively, you can pay 1 across multiple sources until end of the turn to prevent a damage, and then it's going to blow up in your face.
Yeah, so I mean, I see this. What this jumps out to me as is your way to deal with arcane damage in this format. Obviously, the use case is far extends past that. It's like different than Null Rune and Spell Void.
Physical damage as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it extends the physical damage. So those breakpoints on hit triggers, like I think that these pieces of armor, I feel like are going to be quite premium. Like one thing that I'm taking away from looking at these early spoilers, obviously we could get spoiled a bunch of generic equipment or something like that, but I'm getting a similar feeling to Tales of Aria level armor, right? Where like I'm probably going to be first picking these most of the time. They look generic, they look generally powerful, and especially these sort of keywords like you said, like Quell 1, things like that seem just you're going to want to have it, right?
Yeah, it's so funny. When you say the power level of like a set and first picking, like Tales of Aria is not the set that comes to my mind. It's like the one that comes last. It's like Monarch and Welcome to Wraith and Arcane Rising. I have equipment way higher, but we've talked about this before, so
yeah, I think it's more like the choice, right? Like with Tales of Aria equipment, it usually doesn't compete with too much else. So I feel like you're kind of snap picking like the Plume of Evergross or the Deep Blues and like that stuff much faster than I would be in something like Welcome to Wraith, where I might stay open for a bit longer and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think these equipment have a lot of utility because they all have activated abilities as well. And the cool thing about these is they're instant abilities that you can use. So you can like activate Quell, and then you can use the instant ability on some of them. Not all of them, sorry. Some of them, and then also get the effect. Like I looked at the ice one today, which is like you can destroy a frozen card in Arsenal by just like at instant speed by destroying it, but also has Quell. So you can like Quell a couple of times and then play a blue card out of your Arsenal to deal arcane damage with Icelander to trigger the condition of being able to destroy this equipment and then destroy the frozen card in Arsenal. So there's some interesting things there, and then some are just like Quell, and you won't be able to get both parts of the ability. Like I was just looking at the ninja ones, which is like you have to destroy it as part of the instant ability that isn't Quell. So kind of goes hand in hand. But there is some damage that can come through on your turn, of course, like the arcane damage, like damage from attacking things. So you can sometimes get value out of both. Anyway, aside from that, Quell I think is interesting. The equipment piece, yeah, I agree. I think these are going to be premium. The utility is really high because you also have the Ash Wings and Draconic Chain Links. So Quell is probably if you pitch a blue to Quell, very likely you're going to be able to get the full use out of it into a lot of things in this format, which is really interesting. Interestingly, arcane damage might be the least sort of return on your investment, I guess, because there might only be 1 or 2 sources in a turn that come at you. So Quell might actually end up being more relevant or more impactful against these Draconic cards that have higher chain links.
Seems quite good for pivot turns, like combating pivot turns. So like Monarch in particular is a format I feel like or at least Monarch's Shield was centered around like setting up for kind of one big pivot turn where you would gain an advantage where you could usually hold it throughout the rest of the game. And I think that Quell is interesting as a permanent on the battlefield that is going to actively combat like sort of a more all-in strategy on a single turn or something like that.
Yeah, and also you can do cool things like, they've come in with a 4 attack that has an on-hit effect and breakpoint. Well, I block with a 3 card Quell 1, and then I've still got, my blue 2 resources for the next 2 chain links or whatever to still soak up some just kind of incidental damage. So yeah, really cool. Don't want to dwell on too long, but I want to start with Quell because I think it's the most interesting and probably one of the most impactful in terms of like the limited mechanic.
Yeah, definitely shouldn't. Sorry, I have to do this, but we let's go ahead and head on to the next one. I don't want to Quell on it too long, You said dwell like a chump, and I was just like,
yeah, of course.
Quell.
Of course, classic. Dragons. We've got dragons. These look, the Marvels look sick, but even just like the regular cards look freaking awesome. So, of course, we have dragons that transform in the form of the invoke cards. So they're flip cards. You have the spell that invokes, and then you turn your your ash into this, and then the ash goes under so that these dragons do have phantasm, which is important to remember. And then you have the transform card, which have these abilities. Of course, with Dramai, if you played a red card, you've got go again, and then the weapon allows you to attack with these dragons itself. So that's kind of the interaction you have there. I think these are really interesting. I think this is going to shake up the way that people approach both limited and constructed. I think this is going to take a little bit of adapting to personally, just in terms of, we've had permanents before, we've had allies in the form of legendary ones, but I think this is going to change up a little bit about how we play this game and how the play patterns and some of the intuitive stuff that maybe you've learned in other formats might not work exactly how you think it should.
Yeah. The dragon sort of the dragon design space is very new, so it's hard to really wrap your mind. Like for me, it's hard to sort of wrap my mind around, especially how it work in limited. But you're right. Like this interaction is I'm not really sure. Like I'm trying to think of like I guess I'm trying to round it out by coming up with a cohesive idea, but how dragons are
You don't
going to
have to.
play, yeah, how dragons are going to play into the Draconic Ninja and ultimately into Icelander, which is sort of that third variable here that's going to play quite atypically compared to both the Illusionist and the Ninja. I'm just not totally sure how they fit in. Obviously, they're going to be good, but which ones? What are you looking for? Like, what dragon is like the bomb? Which one do you want to open in
Oh,
particular?
I really like Ovia. Yes, Ovia, which is the
Yeah,
one that when it enters play or study your turn, turns an ash into a eighth ash ring. I think that's just like a really good threat that has 6 health. Yeah, it only attacks for 1, but it strikes me as this way to like generate board advantage and turn. It's a good. I think the transform cards, the cards that actually transform your ash into Aether Wings, into the struggling with these names. There's so many new names. I think that's going to be harder to come by. And then, of course, they have Phantasm. So if you give it the +3 and then they maybe it doesn't look like as many poppers, but maybe if they pop it, then you've kind of lost value. This kind of on-board way to continue to do it when, of course, you can generate Ash with your hero anyway, plus other cards. I think it looks really strong to me. It's the one
yeah.
I'm looking out for the most, I think.
Yeah, and I agree with you for why that's good. I'm looking at like Necria in limited, to be honest, at rare. But Necria, when it deals or is dealt damage, put a -1 counter and create an Ash token. It's just a bit persistent, right? A bit harder to get off the board, and it does come in for 4. So it looks particularly good. There are some. What's cool about these dragons, and this is more of a class constructed thing. There's a lot of these sort of niche ones, right? The ones that -1 counters on things, or milling the top of your deck to do damage, blowing up equipment, like all kinds of stuff going on here.
It's so cool, yeah. And the fact they're rare, we're gonna see them. And the fact that the way they interact with Iceland is interesting to me because, of course, you can't throw arcane damage that says hero at it. It has to be able to deal damage to a source or to a target, which we do have in the set. So it's not like we don't have it, but yeah, just worth keeping in mind, especially for constructed as well. You can't Voltic Bolt a dragon. Ward, really interesting. So ward is a new keyword which effectively gives your Aether Ashwing the ability to protect you from damage. So I'm going to read out Sandcover, which is kind of the first one we saw. So it says, it's a 0 cost Draconic Illusionist instant. Target Ash you control gains Ward 4 until the end of turn. So if your hero would be dealt damage, prevent 4 of that damage and destroy this. So you destroy the Ash. Sorry, it's not the Ashwing. It's just the Ash.
Yeah.
You destroy the Ash and prevent 4 damage from a source. So it kind of turns your Aether Ashwing into an enchanting melody, effectively. Sorry, your Ash, not Aether Ashwing, into an enchanting melody, effectively. So I think this is going to be really interesting, this ward mechanic. Again, this feels like another way to interact with arcane damage. I love that we don't see Arcane Barrier in this format, and instead we see all these other ways, or even Spell Void, all these other ways to interact with arcane damage, to interact with the incidental damage that comes from certain cards in this format.
Yeah, and important to note that this is an instant as well. But yeah, Ward 4. So again, like you said, dealing with arcane damage, but also having that dual utility of being able to affect, attacks with physical damage as well. So not really like it's cool that they've developed cards here that are helping you deal with the sort of uninteractive deck in the format, which will probably be Wizard and Limited, right? But these cards have dual utility for also being playable in your mirrors or against the ninja. I think it's genuinely probably a more interesting way of doing it than something like Arcane Barrier or Spell Void, which came in the Blitz decks.
Yep, I couldn't agree more, to be honest. And then, of course, we have the Phoenix Flames, which is, this is the Draconic action attack. This is the one you can add up to 3 Phoenix Flames to your deck in Uprising limited format. This is what James White spoiled, or kind of like teased at the banquet at the Pro Tour. That you'll be able to add cards from your deck that aren't crack baubles before the game starts, and this is what Phoenix Flame does. So, and Fire lets you start with 1 in your graveyard, and Phoenix Flames is a 0 cost Draconic attack for 0, and it says if you control 2 or more Draconic chain links, Phoenix Flame has +1 and go again. So this is how you're going to generate these higher Draconic chains to trigger the abilities, to trigger things like Rupture. This is the kind of key of what Fire is trying to do. And of course, you can start with 1 in your graveyard in Limited, and then you could start with 2 in your deck if you want. I think the interesting question is, how many do you want? How many do you start with? Is it just the full 3 every time? Or is it like, sometimes you always start with the 1 in graveyard, of course, but then sometimes you only want 1 in the deck? But that's going to be interesting to me.
That is particularly interesting. So as the 3 of, obviously doesn't have a blocking value. So That's going to probably affect your ability to, particularly in the mirror, I could see that being quite punishing, right? Getting those at the wrong time. But we have a lot of other effects allowing us to, take it out of our deck, put it in our hand, recur it from the graveyard, etc., etc. So I feel like, as it seems like as this Draconic Ninja, you are going to be playing very long chain links, and that's sort of your goal.
Definitely you go, right? So this is the one that's going to generate it. And I've got some spice to talk about once we get into we want to talk about a bit of Uprising and how we're going to approach this format to start with at the end, because spoiler alert, I think the second cycle is actually going to be relevant, Brendan, but we'll talk about that as we get in. I know, I don't want to get people's hopes up, but I think the second cycle is going to be relevant. So. Next, I want to talk about afflictions. So afflictions are auras that come into play under the opponent's control. So it says an affliction enters the arena under an opposing hero's control. That's what affliction does, and we have these new auras in ice that afflict. And so you've got hypothermia, which is a majestic, but just to read that out, it's a 0 cost, 2 defense, ice action, affliction aura, and it says attacks you control can't gain go again. So that applies to the opponent you put it under. And at the beginning of the end phase, destroy hypothermia. So these are really interesting to me, and I'm glad that we've finally got this kind of like negative aura come into the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Frost Hex in particular, also very interesting, doing damage equal to the number of frostbite tokens. Like, I'm interested in limited. So we have hypothermia, right? So I'm just trying to realize if all these afflictions are at higher rarities. Majestic. Yeah, are they all at majestic?
Yeah. So far from what we've seen, I haven't been able to scroll through everything from the box break today, but I hadn't seen any so far. It looks like the afflictions I've seen so far are majestic. Yeah. So
okay, interesting. Yeah, and the way to interact with the afflictions, like if you become the afflicted player, obviously there's the card that's Thaw, I think it is. Like, what other ways are there to interact? Like, if you do get hit by one of these unlimited, how do you get it off?
I don't think we've seen so far. I think Thor's the only one, which of course can destroy an affliction, or it can unfreeze a card, which we'll move on to next. Freeze is the mechanic which sticks something in place. So Cold Snap is what we've seen so far, one of the cards, which is we've seen the blue version, 1 cost. Target hero may pay 1 resource. If they don't, freeze a card in their arsenal or an ally they control until the start of your next turn. And a frozen object can't be played or attacked. So you can basically hold a card in arsenal for a turn, stop an ally from being able to do anything for a turn. I think freeze is a really interesting mechanic as well. I just love the interaction we're seeing with like the board state start to develop through Flesh and Blood.
Yeah, and giving you a lot of choices as well as maybe playing the deck that's not the aggressor, right? I hate to say pivot turns again, but cycling going back to that sort of Monarch format, it was very noticeable as people sort of came around to that specific turn and being able to interact with that rather than just blocking with the cards from your hand or saving your armor while you could. Like, that's much more exciting. So I'm also very keen on these abilities.
Yeah, likewise. I think it's really cool to see. So we want to move through because we've got a lot to cover in this kind of approaching a new limited format cast and as we prep Uprising. But there are a couple of things I do just want to get your thoughts on. Maybe a bit of a minute summary of the set so far, of your thoughts of the set so far and the preview season so far. What do you think about the classes so far? What do you think about the heroes? And maybe what's your favorite card, or what have you kind of got an eye on for maybe what you want to play heading into maybe like the constructed season?
Yeah, for sure. So it's interesting because, particularly for me, I'm thinking about the world premiere, right? And my world premiere is actually going to happen a bit later than yours. So there's going to be some information that's come out. Yeah, people played those rounds. After this, by the way, don't let me forget. I do want to talk about sort of like the general strategy you should be taking and pitfalls that we've seen in previous formats in the early days.
Don't worry, we're getting to that. That's in this cast.
I know people are going to do that, and that's actually probably one of my motivations to potentially play. Like, I'm really looking at Draconic Ninja, just something that's aggressive, just like in the opponent's face, and like if someone's trying to do something cute with dragons or play wizard,
you just
punish them, right? Yeah, like that's. It's like if you go to play, like a Magic reference, you're going to play Vintage Cube, you know what you're doing. You can just draft Mono Red. You're probably going to be sitting a lot more pretty than if you try to draft like a blue-white control deck. So I think
maybe.
Yeah. So I think like a world premiere state, I'm really looking at Phi here. But at the same time, I might be drawn into the Draconic Illusionist. I think a lot of people are going to be forcing Illusionist. I think that the general sentiment is that like, that's the coolest hero.
It looks fun.
Yeah, it looks super fun. Well, absolutely.
We can talk more about, I guess, the Uprising World Premiere and kind of this new limited format. But what about just from like overall standpoint of the set for what it's going to do for Flesh and Blood and maybe Constructed? Like, how are you feeling? What heroes got you most excited for Constructed? Is it Icelander? Because of course you talked a lot about that hero.
Yes, no, it's Dramai. Like I think that
I'd
Dramai
not
is like,
be.
yeah, I think that, yeah, it's probably a common sentiment to be honest. But like seriously, I brought up this specific idea for a class, and we called it a summoner in this like expansion on the ally mechanic, and I think it's awesome, right? And they've totally blown it out of the water with the design of these dragons. Way more depth than I would have expected. And
Who would have thought?
yeah, and I think this deck, like, we're getting some hints too, right? Like, this deck might be able to attack on multiple axes, right? It looks like an aggressive deck. It looks like red line aggressive, but you look at some of these dragons like Uvia, right? And there's like a potentially like a control deck there, not necessarily like a control that's just going to lock decks out no matter what they're playing against. But if you're playing against Guardian or something, if you're landing 2 dragons a turn, maybe that's enough to bring them behind on tempo because they can't effectively clear 2. And if they do, reach parity up with you by clearing 2 while you make 2, it may be so costly to them that's just not worth it. So potentially you're like defending and you're building up this like critical mass of dragons, and then you eventually are able to come in or something like that. But yeah, face value of Dramai I think is an aggressive deck, but I think that potentially there's another deck there, and that has me very excited for Constructed and things like that.
Yeah, similar wavelength, I think. I mean, it's hard not to be excited about Dramai and dragons and transforming Ash into dragons. So it's definitely what I'm looking forward to the most. And I think probably, I would like to explore fire. I think, Ninja is something I like. I like chain links. I like being able to ramp up the damage. So also really interesting to me. I want to move on next to approaching a new limited format. And I guess a bit of an overview. I'm going to speak a little bit more loosely about Uprising as we get through this. But first of all, I want to start with like some tips and tricks, where we think you should start and where we start when it comes to a new limited format. What are the things we're looking for, and just some key things to keep in mind and remember. And Brendan, you've got some experience of this from the last Uprising World Premiere. Of course, we've got our pre-release experience and our time spent with like Monarch and stuff in particular. So I guess where to start with a new limited format. I think one of the most important things to do to start with, and Brennan, chime in if you think I'm wrong or you got other things, but I think identifying archetypes is quite important to a degree. And I don't mean that you need these like fully fleshed out archetypes, but I think you want to have an idea of what you want to do in the game. And this kind of comes back to like, what are your win conditions? How are you going to win the game? And each of these heroes, as we play these more complicated sets, I think you can fluff stuff. You can mislay your cards, you can put the wrong cards in because you don't really quite have an idea of what you're trying to do, and you just kind of like fumble through it until maybe you get to round 5 or round 6, however many rounds it is, and then you finally go like, like these things work well together, and then it kind of clicks. Like if you can kind of stand back when you're building your deck and think about these kind of key interactions, like even if it's 2, 3, 4 like key interactions, or what you want to do on the ideal best turn with like your draconic chain links or whatever, I think that's a really good place to start when it comes to a new limited format. I think it's going to give you the best sort of start once you head into your round 1.
Yeah, so if you're playing a world premiere, most of the people, it might be region dependent, but if you're going to Vegas, this will probably be most people. Most people are going to play pile. So what that means is they're going to get all their cards together, and it might be because they want to play Dramai, or they want to play Wizard, or they want to play Ninja, and they're just going to throw them all in. It's like, they don't know, like they don't want to make the decision. Or what becomes really popular, maybe it'll be less so because we have Illusionist, Ninja, and Wizard, but is for people to just put in all of their blocking cards, particularly their cards that block for 3 or more, and then just try to fatigue. So Hayden, you mentioned game plans, understand how you're going to win the game. I think that is, if you're not doing that strategy, which I highly recommend against, you need to understand how you're going to beat that strategy because it's going to be there. People love doing that strategy. We saw it in the Tales of Aria World Premiere, but we also saw it back in Monarch. In Monarch pre-releases, people are playing Prison Pile. They pile stuff together and just try to fatigue these shadow decks. So yeah, it will be. Yeah, at the calling as well. So it will be there. So I think you need to identify the archetypes that you can, but also just identify how your deck is trying to win the game, right? Like what is your core strategy? What are you playing to? Maybe you're reaching the second cycle of the deck, that mythical place. But you just need some sort of key interaction of how you actually plan to reduce your opponent's life total to 0. Because just playing the game and just playing out your cards sort of indiscriminately likely will not lead to that.
Yeah, we need some specific strategies once we get to talk about Uprising in particular. But I think there's a few kind of low hanging fruit and some interesting things that might come up second cycle. I heard you mention. I think it's coming up. We'll talk about it. Yeah. So identifying strong cards, I think, is a really good place to start. So like, what is a really good return on your investment? Like, think about, just as a quick example, you want red cards in the Draconic decks. Obviously, that's what's going to power up your hero abilities. That's what's going, you're going to be using to pitch for these triggered abilities and playing out for, Fire in that case, and also pitching for Dramai. So what are the extra strong cards, and like what do they look like? What are their payoffs and stuff? And these are the kind of things you're looking for. So like cards like Rupture, for instance, that require 4 or more Draconic Train Links. These cards look really good, right? But reliably, how often can your deck get to that? And how many of these cards do you want? So, these cards might look strong on the surface of it, but like, what's the kind of like investment you have in this upfront? So I think it's really important to think about what these cards actually look like. And some of these cards that are, like medium strong, just good, solid attacks, often still really good, even in a format that has a lot of synergy like this. So worth looking at. Identifying ways to win the game, as you say, really important. Like you say, Brennan, how are you going to beat the pile deck that shows up? Especially if you're playing Fire, I think it's in particular importance to understand what you're going to do there. And hey, we'll talk about second cycle soon, but I think that's a good way to do it. And what is the speed of the format? I think it's really important to understand, because that's going to dictate, I think, which of these kind of strategies you get on board. It's hard to know maybe until like the first couple of rounds, like what the speed of the format is going to be, even until we get, to pass pre-release into the actual format itself. But if you can try and understand as much as possible, Tales of Aria, for example, you basically never saw your second cycle, right? Outside of these Ultim piles and these Ultim games that you're talking about, Brendan. So even then, not always. So, whereas Monarch, you very often did see your second cycle as a very different format. So this will always influence the type of decks you want to build, I think, and where you want to start with your power lines. Like, are they you want to get all the power out there early and just get as much damage on the board, or are you trying to eke every point of damage out in the mid to late game? These are quite interesting. And then respect equipment. That's my last tip, Brennan. Respect equipment, both from in terms of your equipment and your opponent's equipment, and understanding the power of them, because I actually think the equipment in the set, from what I've seen so far, is probably the most powerful equipment we've seen so far, but, could be wrong.
I think it's important to try to understand what the average block value of the set is. We haven't seen all of the generics yet, but that's really where the set gets its blocking identity, I feel like, is like once you get to the generics, it's like if all the generics block for 2, the set, on average, I guess, kind of has a lower blocking value, something like Welcome to Wraith. But, that changes, like, it'll change your breakpoints. Like, it'll change critical breakpoints, and it will, you can really structure your turns around, okay, my opponent's likely block value in hand is actually not going to be 12. It's highly unlikely to be 12. Significantly changes things. It changes your ability to get fatigued in a lot of these matches. But I think that time will have to tell, in terms of like, once we actually see the entire set, whether these generics are blocking for 3, or if there's a class that has an unusual amount of block 3s compared to the others. I mean, looking at the Ninja, they actually do have quite a few block 3s and block 2s as well. Wizard obviously coming in with quite a bit of the block 2s, looking at here at Common. But, we'll see. I think but those generics are a big, that's a big narrative for the set. It's like, once you see how much that they're going to block for on average.
Yeah, we've seen some with some of the cards shown today, and of course, with generics, as you'd expect, there's a lot of defense 2s. That's just what you'd expect with generics. And non-attack actions, of course, you often see defend 2s, but there is defense 3s, and generic there looks like there's a couple, and of course you have them within both the class and the talent. I think the other interesting thing that kind of skews it is you have cards like Phoenix Flame and these sorts of things, which kind of change the math on the average block value, and people trying to play a lot of reds for Draconic, or maybe a lot of blues for Icelander. Where do yellows fall? That's what's going to be really interesting for me about the set, is what is the place of a yellow in this format? And of course, we have a lot more reds than usual because of Draconic. We have red only cards in Draconic, so what does that actually mean for the set? There's so many questions I have about the set, but I think just understand those. We came from equipment. How did we get to here? But yeah, right. Because you said about yeah, of course, yeah. I think it's important.
Do you think that if you're playing this limited set, do you think that if you are playing like Fire, you're playing Dramai, and you end up getting in sealed, getting paired against an Icelander, do you think that you increase the blue count of your deck at all?
Yeah, maybe. That's something that's going to be... That might be the place of yellows, right? That might be where yellows, you still get the power level, but you get the ability to pay for Frostbites and still be able to play a card out of hand, or whatever it might be. I think you're going to still want blues, and we'll talk about each of the heroes and what I think starting ratios might look like once we get into the heroes. But yeah, I think it's going to be a potential sideboard plan is to have a couple more blues, but we'll see how it goes. All right, Brendan, I want to talk about sealed tips specifically, and then a couple of draft tips as well. We can kind of just go through these and then get on to talking about, I guess, Uprising in the limited context. But I think one of the best places, because we are going to be playing sealed first, look at your thickest pile first. Just start with it and just see what it looks like. Like start with the most cards and see is that where the power level is, especially if maybe sealed is newer to you or you're really worried about having to read all the cards and stuff. Like start with your thickest pile and see what you've got there. Break it into the 3 heroes, generic, and the talent is what you want to do. So you should have, I guess, in the set you should have 6 piles because we've got ice, draconic, generic, and then the 3 heroes. Break it down that way. Should be easier to look at it that way as well and evaluate your cards that way. And as we always say, pull out your win conditions. What are the cards that are going to help you win the game? I'm looking personally for like good synergy, ways to maybe abuse something like a weapon or a specific interaction multiple times. Of course, when we have things like, like Uvia, for instance, like how can I like abuse that card? Like I want to keep that card around as long as possible. Have I got ward to? I'm sorry, not ward. Have I got ways to protect it? I think there's some prevention in the set that we might have seen. Or is there a way that I can like have I got multiple? I don't know. What can I do about that card? Or maybe a weapon in the case of fire maybe. And then what are the cards that are going to give you a big swing turn? I think about cards like Via the Vanguard, right? These cards that can be a pivot in themselves or cards that set up a big pivot turn. So it's kind of what I'm looking for in sealed. Anything else, Brendan, in terms of sealed tips?
Yeah, I just want to say if you're coming from, another game, like one thing to know is when you're opening your packs and you're sort of, you're splitting them, like Hayden said, your majestics to your rares are not really going to drive where you end up playing. Like there might be some standouts, and this has been more of an outlier than I think that it's been consistent in Flesh and Blood with like something like Via the Vanguard, which is particularly powerful. But mostly you're going for density, right? You're looking for cohesion and like synergy between your cards rather than you're like, I have a single bomb. Because those, for the most part, don't exist. In Tales of Aria, we saw it a little bit, maybe with like Awakening. Awakening was pretty powerful and sealed. But outside of that, I think that absolutely like density and cohesion is way more important than any sort of rare, majestic, etc.
Yeah, I have the kind of last point on my tips list is I personally rather have a consistent deck than a spike deck. So, the deck that can spike a turn. And that's basically what you're saying, Brendan. I'd rather have the consistency and the synergy. I'd rather have a deck that has like really good resource base and slightly less power than a deck with, a higher power level, but an inconsistent resource base, which is going to cost me, I think, especially early on in a format when it's unknown what the format looks like. Maybe in a format like Tales of Aria, I might have taken the gamble more, but I'm not so sure in this format. So what I say about sealed. What about draft? Maybe a couple of draft tips. People are going to be doing some drafts over the next few weeks, maybe with like prize packs or once we hit like pre-release, because you can do drafts at pre-release this time, which is super exciting. I think my local pre-release is doing a sealed maybe into a top 8 draft or something like that. So I'm excited to have draft at pre-release. I think one of the first things, Brendan, is I like to do is what's going to be underdrafted. That's where I kind of want to start. I think early on Illusionist might be overdrafted because people really want to play with these dragons. And
Definitely.
I might be looking at even just Icelander, just stay away from Draconic entirely, or take the Draconic like talent cards early, let all these Illusionist cards go around, and then wheel all the Ninja cards and have this good fire deck. That might be something I'm looking to do. So I think always, no matter what the limited format, always try and identify what might be underdrafted. I remember in Monarch, Brendan, right? Like people were staying away from Shadow initially.
Oh yeah, for sure, and I think rightly so too, because it was much more punishing to play than some of its lights variants. But I think if you're going into a draft format for any new set in Flesh and Blood or most new sets, don't underappreciate armor. I know that we probably overappreciate it on this podcast, but that has been like a critical failure of a lot of people going into new limited sets in Flesh and Blood, has been just underdrafting armor, letting it go by, not realizing sort of the power level of that permanent on the board. And it is incredibly powerful, and that's consistent across most sets. But some in particular, I think that armor, you can get some really first pickable armor, like things like Plume of Ethergrowth, Deep Blue, etc.
Cross Strap, Goliath Gauntlet, most equipment. I kind of think most equipment is first pickable for a couple of reasons. It's like the strength of them, this thing that starts on the board. Like if you take Goliath Gauntlet, for instance, it's like, okay, here starting on the board is like 10% of the opponent's life total. Brilliant. That's exactly what I want. Or, it's like Deep Blue. It's like this impactful effect that's always going to get me out of an awkward hand once in the game and it starts on the table. So, yeah, these are the things I'm looking at. I think Quell, like we say, is powerful. I think the class and the generic equipment all look pretty good from what I've seen so far. Also, what the generic equipment allows you to do is stay open, right? And I think that's another thing when it comes to draft is have a plan. And one of those plans you might have is to stay open. Like maybe I'm looking towards like the Draconic cards or the generic equipment or the generics early on. But I would say if you are planning to stay open, like that's your kind of plan you're on for the draft, don't be afraid to like hedge really strong cards. Like if, like a bonkers fire card comes around third pick, that could be a signal, right? Because two people haven't taken it before you, pick it up, and then it's like, yeah, then I take like a couple of Draconic, I take a generic, and then all of a sudden there's no Ninja coming through. Or all of a sudden there is a bunch of Ninja coming through. Like that would be kind of my tip is have a plan. And if you want to stay open, do it, but don't be afraid to hedge.
Yeah, and we're in new territory here with 2 Draconic heroes and 1 Ice hero. Not into those
Yeah, that's
specific
really cool.
talents, but we have 2 heroes sharing a talent and then one that is completely separate, right? So that's a whole new landscape for draft and sort of trying to metagame those drafts. I'm not exactly sure what's going to be correct quite yet, but I do err on the side of what Hayden said, which is that Icelander might be underdrafted because Dramaya is just so interesting and fun and cool, and dragons are awesome. And like, if you don't get your Dramaya deck, at least you got cards for 5. And then there's just this sneaky Icelander sneaking around on that, or getting passed around that draft pod.
Abling. Yeah, maybe the tactic is just like immediately go into like to ice and just cut it all off, cut the Icelander off. I don't know. It's gonna be interesting. We've never had we've had 3 hero set in terms of Tales of Aria for draft, but we haven't had it where you, like you say, you have this split of talent for 2 heroes and then not for another. So that's what part of what I think is going to make this draft format just super awesome and make having plans and having draft strategies and responding to the table really, really important. I can see drafts where you start with like 4 or 5 ice cards, and then it turns out that like 3 people at the table are just like committed to ice, right? They're on that strategy, and all of a sudden you move into a Draconic, and then you move into a class from there. Like there's so many different paths you can take, and it's all about what's happening at the table. And like you say, if it's meta to stay open and go Draconic, then all of a sudden like Icelander becomes a lot more appealing. So, and then that'll flip again, right? That'll flux again. So meta and draft is a real thing, and I think this set's going to allow it to flourish, which is really cool. Last thing I did want to say about draft, Brendan, is just pay attention to what's tabling and think about what's going to table. And when I say table, that means like what's going to wheel around the table. So what from the current pack you're looking at is going to come back to you. So let's say we're in pack 3, and I'm firmly I'm firmly in Draconic. I'm in fire at this point, right? I open up the pack. There's a couple of really good Draconic cards, and there's some really good fire cards. And now I have a thing that's like, okay, what's the best card for my deck? And then also like, what is actually going to table here? Because if I take, a really strong card, but then that maybe means that like I'm not going to actually get anything back from this pack. Is that the right decision? Sometimes it's correct to like take, maybe a really strong Draconic card because there's 3 ninja cards in the pack, and one of them is definitely going to wheel. Like that, there's this kind of idea of like wheeling around the table, and I think it's important to try and, as much as possible as you get into draft more, is pay attention to what's kind of going around the table for multiple reasons, but also start with what you think will come back around.
Yeah, and there's a really funny dynamic here that happens as well as like what will table as you go pack to pack. I used to do this with
Rangers.
Lexi with tabling my blues in pack 3, which is very risky, by the way. I don't recommend doing it. But basically because people usually wouldn't start in Lexi, or if they did, they might not, they might be kind of in between Lexi and Briar there. You could sometimes table like blue arrows and sort of fill out your resource curve at the last pack and then get kind of premier choice on the first 2. That being said, is like you have this idea of like a philosophy of how you're going to draft, and as soon as somebody else thinks that, the opposite strategy is now correct to just do the opposite of that.
Yeah, it's meta. That's what I'm saying. Like the meta for draft is for real. Like it's so true. Like it can change from draft to draft, from event to event. Like it does change. So yeah, I honestly cannot wait to draft the set. I just can't wait. Let's look forward to Uprising specifically and talk a bit about, because we're going to of course do our set review next week, but I do just want to talk about early thoughts, and as we head into the Uprising, give a few of our thoughts that might help some players playing at the Uprising World Premiere this weekend. And of course we won't get as much time. We'll be focusing more on the cards themselves next week, so maybe kind of play styles and interactions and stuff we won't be touching on as much. So the first thing I want to talk about is like what's going to be important in the set, Brendan, and my first thing I have on this list is Draconic a second cycle limited talent? Now, hear me out before you give me your opinion, Brendan, okay? Because this set does look potentially, outside of 5, of course, which looks super aggressive, it does look like for Dromai, you need to set some stuff up. But of course, with these red line decks, we're actively pitching cards to get our abilities, right? So we're already pitching gas to the bottom of our deck. That's something that we're doing. So it does seem to me like if you can get back to second cycle, because you are incentivized to pitch red cards, that you can actively set up these really, really strong hands into the late game. I think this is where cards like Rupture are going to be really powerful, because you can actually know exactly what your chain link will look like, as opposed to early on, where you can maybe sit in an arsenal, but you're kind of waiting for the right cards, and that can be a little bit hard. And you can know, like, I can plan out my Phoenix Flames, etc. And then, because just basically the powerful cards being your resources, like
you're getting a benefit for it. Like we used to we would do this in other sets, and you would have to actively sometimes punt like a power card for later. You'd be investing. Yeah, I'd be investing for the late game, but here it's just going to be natural to you, probably presenting close to optimal damage on your early turns anyway. So I think that now that I hear you say it like that, the theory, I'm with you. The execution. We're going to have to see how that one comes out. Because, sometimes that stuff can be overshadowed by just, like, overall power level, right?
I agree. Yeah, it's going to be hard to see. And I am a little bit worried that the speed of fire and stuff might mean that it's not as relevant. But I think Icelander is maybe the balance of all. And where I think second cycle might actually come into play is the Draconic versus Icelander matchup. That's where I'm really looking for it. I think maybe in the Draconic versus Draconic, maybe less so, because you might not see second cycle. It's about, beating out the dragons before they take a hold, or, stopping the, beating out the chain links, forcing them to use their Draconic chain links on your dragons, or whatever it is. That's maybe what that looks like. So, I'm getting a t-shirt printed that says second cycle. Is it a meme? ? Because at this point, that's what people tell me. But, they weren't around. They weren't around in the old days. They don't know.
Man, back when Flesh and Blood was a good game. I'm kidding.
Flesh and Blood, real flesh. No, of course not. I'm so excited for where we're going with the direction of design. But tell you what, if we get second cycle being impactful, I'll be even happier. How many resources to play in Draconic decks, aka blues and yellows, outside of just your reds? I think this is going to be a really important question. And I've thought about this a little bit this morning as I look over the set review, Brendan. There are cards that still cost, right? There are still turns where you're going to need 2 to 3 resources just looking at what your deck does. Because some of like the cards that turn Ash into Aether Wings, cost, or you want to play multiple chain links, Draconic chain links, and some of these cards cost 1 and even some 2. So some number of blues, some number of yellows. Yellows are really interesting to me. I'm not sure what this quite looks like. Yellow, to be honest, I can see like a pyramid coming with some of these. What am I talking about? A curve downward.
A Ponzi.
So you have, sure, why not? A curve downward. So you have a left to right. Most reds, then yellows, then blues, or a slight inverse triangle where it's like, it's reds and then yellows and then slightly more blues than yellows. I guess a non-equilateral. What's a non-equilateral triangle called? Oh man.
Excuse me.
This is how far removed I am from school at this point, and how much I don't work with math or shapes in my job. So anyway, that's what I can see. I think blues are going to be important. I'm thinking around like 5 to 8 blues in these Draconic decks is where my starting point is going to be, but it's really going to depend on like my yellows and my cost base. So what I'm going to do at the Uprising World Premiere and first few like kind of limited events I play is go like, what does my turn look like? So, okay, I think my chain links are going to roughly look like this. I'm going to need 2 to 3 resources every game. Actually, I only need 2 resources with what most of these chain links look like. So I'm looking for mostly reds and yellows because, of course, pitch or red most of the time, especially for Dramai. And then if it's like, no, I've got some of these 2 cost finishes and stuff, then I'm looking more blues. I will say, I think it's going to be important to have your blues be low cost so that you can play them out, and especially if we think second cycle is going to be relevant, get rid of them. And if you do draw like multiple blues, then of course that's more difficult. Or if you actually just want to pitch 1 red on a turn, a 0 cost blue can be really impactful to actually play out the card as opposed to have a dead card, unless it blocks for 3.
This topic of yellows is particularly interesting to me because I know that yellows, they're a part of rounding out that resource card, and they're going to change sort of, I don't know, the variable numbers you might need in red or blue. Like, they do have an effect, right? But, if I'm looking at Uprising, and let's say I had perfect choice of the cards, of what color card I could have, regardless of breakpoints. Let's not think about, a yellow that's for 4 and, maybe the red's for 5. And it's like, it's pretty good value. Why would I want yellows? Because I feel like I want reds, right? I feel like I want reds in Draconic, but at the same time, I feel like I would usually want a blue over a yellow because of things like Quell, because of things like Wizard existing in the site, Frostbites, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So where do you see the yellow playing in there?
I'm glad you asked that question, Brennan. Let me give you basically the reason that I think yellows are going to be overlooked to start with, and I think are going to be good in this set, is that if you're wanting to pitch reds for either late game or for Dramai's effect or whatever it is, because you're playing so many reds, you want your card that you then play off of it, if it's not a red, to have impact, and yellow has more impact than blue. That's basically my kind of small thesis right now, and why I think that yellow is going to be really important in this limited format, but be quite overlooked, is basically because of that. So if I have a 1-cost yellow, and it's the only card I'm like paying for this turn, I pitch a red to get the effect or whatever, I pitch a red to the bottom. This is what I'm looking for. I don't want this to be a blue. I want it to be a yellow. So it's offsetting some of, yes, you get less resource for it for maybe when you do want to use it, but some decks might not care about that as much, right? So it's this balancing act of the impact of the card itself and the resource it has. It's pretty classic, right? Like, why do you want a blue in the deck? Why I need resources? Okay, what's the best blues I can play based on like the power level? And yellow just comes to that equation a while. It's just about the amount of resources.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like in the past, I've often looked at yellows as like, they were definitely the in-between. Like, I would prefer the red most of the time, and I prefer the blue for resources. And the yellow would be there as like, if the yellow had a breakpoint, if the yellow was for 4, or if it had a relevant on-hit trigger, and it was playable. But most of the time they were just playable. So they came into my deck to sort of fill it out. But that's an interesting concept, as like the playable card on the first cycle of the deck as you pitch the red, to have more of an impact than something like a blue. It's just particularly interesting to me, and we can't call it yet. I think there's way too many things I haven't seen yet. But like whether or not you're going to actually side up blues when you play against something like Icelander, because you've got Frostbites, you've got arcane damage coming. So
maybe you side up yellows.
Maybe you side
yeah, like this is going to be the question, right? And it's really going to come down to your cost base in the deck. I think, like I said, like what does the average turn look like from a cost base perspective, and then work backwards. That's how I think you should always build decks in Flesh and Blood, especially in limited, but more so in this set. I think it's really important because you are trying to maximize the power level of some of these cards, especially because of the Draconic talent, and because the Draconic, the Draconic cards have high power levels, so you want these cards in your deck. So every resource that you put in, yellow or blue, be it, is maybe a Draconic card being cut, because we only have red cards in Draconic. So the set inherently, the way it's designed, is balanced this way, where there's more red cards in the set. So what does this look like? And that's really interesting to me. So we'll see what it looks like. I think it's something to keep an eye on. I don't think it's necessarily guaranteed, but I just think something to keep an eye on, because you might have to play yellows for resources because you just don't have the blue count because of the amount of reds. So we'll see how it pans out. I'm excited to play some sealed and get into it. The Phantasm effect, something I want to talk about for Uprising Limited. So it might look very difficult, very different to Monarch in terms of, it was all about heralds coming in, and Phantasm attacks. This time it's the dragons and the Ashwings that have the Phantasm attached to them, thanks to Ash. So it's very different. We have, looks like a lot less poppers, which makes sense. Yes. But sometimes popping these dragons is going to be very relevant. Think about the ball lightning, the six with 1 health one that deals 3 arcane damage on hit. Like popping that with 1 card is going to be pretty huge. So, and of course, like even some of the ones that are harder to kill, Ovia, killing that with just a popper, a 6 attack might be really relevant. But it's not going to. On one hand, it's very different to Monarch, and it's not going to maybe warp the format as much. But on the other hand, these things can get out of hand, right? And they do cost you chain links, and they do cost you damage. If you want to go ahead and kill 3 Ashwings, for instance, maybe they got a little bit out of hand. Unless you're, how are you doing that? Well, that's 3 separate sources of damage that you're going to have to sort that out with.
Yeah.
3 action points. It's not easy.
I have a theory with this set and Phantasm Poppers. I think in limited, and obviously we've seen Thaw. I haven't seen the box break, so I could already sound like a fool. But I think in limited they will have less. Like there will not be that many poppers, right? In Monarch, it was a key theme. You would want these in your deck. If you didn't open it in your shield pool, you're like, well, I'm gonna have a really tough time against Prism. I think that the design of these dragons in limited is for them. Like I think the intention will be for a lot of them to be killed via damage and not via being popped. So I think we'll see significantly less poppers because there is this other way of dealing with them, right? This more interactive way, I guess. I could be wrong, but
yeah. Well, there is one thing we did see in the box breakers. We actually saw, I've seen at least 1 Phantasm attack. So there's a Draconic Illusionist attack, which is like, it's yellow that we saw. It's common, so I assume it's a cycle. Cost 2, has 7 attack, Phantasm, and has, I think it's when it's destroyed, create an Ash token. So quite a relevant ability there. So yeah, these 6 attacks are going to be relevant. We have seen some of them. There's a really cool card. I can't remember what it's called from me. It's called Fendal's Fighting Spirit. Looks pretty cool. It's I've only seen the yellow version so far, but of course there'll be a cycle. It's a common. It's a 3-cost, 2 defense, 6 attack at yellow, and it says when you attack or defend with Fendale's Fighting Spirit, if you have less life than an opposing hero, gain a life. So it's like the inverse of like some of the cards like Wounding Blow, I guess, or not the inverse directly, but very similar in terms of getting plus attack or losing life if it deals damage. So yeah, I think that card's pretty cool. So there is some poppers out there, and it looks like we've got some Phantasm attacks that we saw this morning. So yeah, for the Phantasm effect, it's going to be very different to Monarch, but it's still going to be relevant and things can get out of hand. How good are allies, Brendan? I think that's an important question when you're trying to determine like the strength of this format, the speed, the power level. Like, how good are allies actually? And I think it's really, before you answer the question directly, I think it's important to just consider a few things, right? You know, it costs you an action point, right? In terms of like, you have to have go again. It's not the same as when you break a Spectre, of course. Like, it's, you know, you get the go again, but you do need to have go again in the first place. And then you need the damage, and sometimes you're going to lose damage on that. If you're trying to kill Ashwings or ones that have 1 life and you're spending an attack that has 3 or 4 damage, that's really difficult, especially in this format where we don't have, you know, you don't have Kadachis when you're fire, you have the dragon weapon, a draconic weapon, and if you're, you know, Icelander, maybe it's costing you a whole action point to take care of one little ally.
Yeah, for sure. So there could be more dragons, right? But I don't think I've seen any dragons at common. I've seen that rare. So they will be prevalent, but not overwhelming. I don't think there will be limited decks outside of draft, maybe in draft, that are centered around like just kind of creating dragons. I do think that there's going to be a balance though, where there will be some players that fall into the trap of trying to develop a dragon and develop a board state while they're kind of just getting aggroed down, right? And the opposing players just going to ignore it anyway. Are they good? Absolutely. Permanents are incredible in Flesh and Blood, especially if you can get them early. And the dragons look powerful at the same time. But yeah, I think that, you know, something like Fi could potentially just kind of exploit it.
Yeah, could be the counter, right? Might be hard for Icelander to deal with, but maybe not so much on the other side where, you know, you do have these. It's the Ashwings for me that might be the problematic ones, because it's like, do I want to spend an action point and a card to kill that? That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
My last kind of thing, and I guess this Uprising, looking forward to what's important in the set, is generics actually look pretty good from what we've seen so far. Of course, there's the equipment. We just talked about a couple of the cards specifically, but what I just kind of saw this morning is that, yeah, some of the generics look pretty reasonable. There was one I was looking at before, Sift, which is, I saw the yellow version, 0 cost, 3 defense, non-attack action that says put up to 3. The resolution's not great on these. 3 cards from your hand on the bottom of your deck, then draw that many cards. Seems kind of interesting because it's like, well, you use a card to lose it, but if we do think that like something like Second Cycle is important, that card's really interesting. It can dig you to stuff, and then of course it does just defend 3 and can be resources, and you know, that might be relevant. So yeah, the generics are really interesting. I think from what I've seen so far, they look good. Like there's some that allow for extra defense. Like there's a card called Flex, which is like when you attack or defend with Flex, you can pay +2. And if you do, it gains +2 attack, and the red's 4 attacks, so you can make it into a popper for Phantasm, or it's just an extra attack.
That's quite good.
You know, if you've got the extra resources to sink into it, like I really like some of these kind of effects. So yeah, I want to finish kind of through this, I guess. What are we calling it? The approaching new limited format, and when we're talking about Uprising specifically, by just talking about the hero styles and some of the things that we think are going to be relevant. We've kind of already alluded to a lot of them. Let's kind of tie them up. Let's talk about Dromai first. I think if I'm talking about Dromai and what I'm thinking initially, the patterns of play for me that look like pitching a red to play a transform, to transform my Aether, my Ash into something, hopefully a dragon, or maybe it's an Aether Ashwing with some of the non-attack actions we have. Attack with go again with either an attack or the ally itself. And then either, you know, attack with the ally after the go again attack, or maybe you don't have a go again attack and it's like the ally has go again, you attack, and then you attack with just a good damage spell, a good damage attack afterwards. And that's kind of what I think is going to be the general base game plan for Dromai. And I think you're going to kind of adapt and change from that. But I think in week 1, that's what I'm expecting the most kind of play pattern wise to see out of Dromai.
Yeah. I just want to quickly mention, I think that like looking at the set from like 10,000 feet, it does look like there's a bit of a like limited triangle via design. It looks like, you know, Dromai beats Icelander, Icelander beats Fi, and Fi beats Dromai. I think that is like, there's a kind of a foundational theme there, right? As sort of balance. Will that be how it actually plays out? Probably not, but still, just keep it in mind, you know, when picking your deck. Sort of, I think that they have intentionally made that a triangle as if possible.
Yeah, potentially. But I think there's also play within that because of what Draconic does. Because
Of course, yeah.
lest we forget, like, so the Aether Ashwings themselves actually have Arcane Barrier, right? Like, I'm not making that up. I'm not just
No, that's
misremembering
correct,
that.
yeah.
No, they have Arcane Barrier. So that's really interesting, right? Like, the more of those you actually get on board, the more they have. So, like, of course, Icelander can play attacks, and it's not like they can't play attacks to deal with these allies. But, you know, if you're on the ally route with Dromai, maybe as opposed to, I don't know, like more Draconic cards and just more attacks, it's going to be really interesting. Like, how many of these can you reliably make? It's going to be, I think there's going to be different archetypes, which I want to dive into at some point. But first, we'll need to see the whole set, I guess.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting. Because Dromai can also play Draconic, right? Like, and does care about chain links. It can still play cards with Rupture, etc. So, interested to see what that kind of means. What about Phi? So I think Phi, of course, Phoenix Flames can be really important, of course. How many Phoenix Flames to play is a really interesting question. As we said before, is it 2 to 3? Is it 1 to 2? Is it always 3? I think it's going to be really interesting. My default is probably going to be to play 2 to 3, probably 3, depending on the other cards that I have around it. And then I think it's going to be about, like, the game plan is going to be about recycling those. Obviously, there's cards that allow you to pull them back to your hand. That's the hero ability, of course, and gets cheaper with Draconic. And then I really think it is going to be a lot of, like, pitching some of this red gas earlier because of the cost structure of your deck and the structure of just how many reds you have. And then you are often going to get through to second cycle, I think. And it's going to be on second cycle where you can do things like Rupture, where you can have the payoff, the really big payoff cards for Fire with, like, the on-hit effects and the Draconic links. That's where I really see it. But then also, I think first cycle is about utilizing Arsenal, getting back some of these Phoenix Flames as much as possible, and just kind of utilizing just pure damage.
Yeah, it does look like the premier aggro deck of limited. So, yeah.
Yep. Lastly, your favorite, Icelander, which you did say, like, you would main if there was an out hero. So it's an interesting balance, I think, like you say.
In my career.
It's not new for Brendan. Interesting balance, like you say, right, with the two Draconics and Icelander. Like, where does this happen? Is Icelander, just because of the purest form of it, actually going to be quite powerful? Like, you have access to all these ice cards, and you can, like, really just, basically, where I see this early on is you're just trying to disrupt as much as possible, just trying to kill the chain links, try to kill the ability for a Dromai to make a dragon and attack with that plus something else. You really want to limit that, and then you want to be able to maybe, like, clear out the dragon with an attack on your turn, play arcane damage on their turn. Like, maybe that's what the play style looks like. I kind of thought through, like, maybe what some lines for Icelander looks like. It could be like, 4-card hand, no arsenal, you defend with 1 card, you pitch and fuse something, deal damage, and lock down maybe the arsenal on the Draconic side. And then you put that blue that you just revealed into your arsenal. And then the next chain cycle might be like, okay, well, I play this on your turn to deal some damage or clear something up, and then, block with a card. Then on my turn, I'm, like, coming with an attack to kill a dragon or something. So I think Icelander actually has a lot of play to it. It's going to be really interesting and limited. I think Icelander is, of the 3 heroes, the more first cycle orientated hero, I think, because you don't have all these reds you're pitching. You're going to be pitching more blues and stuff like that, which obviously feels like, Draconic potentially, as the game goes on, gets stronger with the deck density. You more traditional Flesh and Blood, I think, going the other way.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, like, Icelander in particular is one where we really just need to see the rest of the cards. Like, how much can we utilize her ability in the arsenal, and what does it look like? Because it does have that sort of foundational wizard concept, which I guess is just a Kano concept, where, you play on your turn for most of the game, and then it sort of, at some point in the game, or technically at any point in the game, you can just, like, cheat the second turn cycle and play a threat on their turn as well. And if you're able to open up a window via your turn, you can do that when they sort of have their, shields down on their turn, right? So
yeah.
I feel like it's going to be sort of like tempo oriented like that. I don't know. Icelander just, it's always sort of, it spoke to me like that was sort of a play style for it.
Yeah, weirdly so far, this format, from what I've seen and what I think the play style is going to look like, reminds me more of, like, Welcome to Wraith, in terms of, like, this tempo-based format where you're looking at hand cycles and what you're trying to do maybe once you get into early late game, as opposed to just trying to do one thing and do it quickly, or set up very specific game states. I think there's a lot more about setting up different game states through the game and trying to find spots where you can swing tempo. So maybe similar to Monarch in that regard as well in some ways. But I think, yeah, like somewhere between Wild Control and Monarch might be how this set plays out, just in terms of like how important tempo is and what the game looks like. Because Tales of Aria, like tempo was important, but for different reasons. It was like once you take tempo, it's like very hard to lose it, or on the flip side, once you lose it, very hard to get it back, and then the game can just kind of be over in 2 turns.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested to see what the Premier Fatigue deck looks like. I think that was whatever that deck is, whatever it becomes, it's like a very equalizing force in the format. You know, particularly we had, of course, Oldhim most recently, but even Prism was played to like that way to an extent back in Monarch. I don't think it was as effective. And then Arcane Rising, it was quite rife. But you know, Welcome to Wraith, we had the powerful weapons. Basically, made that not as much of a strategy. It looks like we do have. I mean, you know, Fi does have a weapon that is going to attack for 3. So we'll see on that end. But that's really what I'm holding my breath for. Is like what is going to be like the Premier Fatigue strategy. What can you, if you do get blessed by the draft gods and you can just draft 40 cards, 40 playable cards,
what does it look like?
Yeah, what will that look like?
Yeah, interested. Any kind of thoughts on, I guess we kind of talked through this already, like what we think sealed and draft are going to look like. I think the only thing I could say is maybe draft is going to look faster than sealed. I think that's usually the case. Of course, you're able to pull things together more. But the one thing that might kind of throw the spanner in the works with this set is that you do have this one ice hero, and it's got things like freeze. It's got a lot more impact, I think, than maybe even just plain frostbites from Ultim had previously, and we already saw how Ultim could slow down a format. So yeah, really interested to see the difference between sealed and draft. I don't really have too many thoughts about it right now until I get in and play the set, though.
Yeah, and then just like final tips, which is kind of we'll be kind of reiterating, is like how to approach your first event or approach the world premiere. Win cons, understanding how you're going to win the game, how you're going to actually reduce the opponent's life total to 0. Sort of don't play pile. I don't think you should ever play pile at these events. It's going to be very attractive sometimes because maybe the cards are a bit more complicated. You don't know them all yet. Or it's just like, oh, I can just punish somebody who doesn't have a game plan. I think that building a cohesive deck with most sealed pools and in most formats is a reasonable thing to do. In Tales of Aria, I thought it was quite effective. Monarch, even more so. And I think that, like these heroes look very synergistic, like Fi and Jeremiah in particular. We'll see what Icelander looks like, but I think that, running sort of a minimum card deck or maybe 32 cards or whatever it is going to be the effective strategy.
Yeah. I mean, like I say, I think second cycles will be relevant. I think there's enough power in these cards that you can really stack up a really strong second cycle. So I think it's going to be really hard to play pile or fatigue. I mean, I wouldn't say it's impossible, and I don't know what it could look like. If I was to hazard a guess at what it might look like, it might be Dramai with, ward effects on Ashwings and this ability to like use an ally to kind of pressure the opponent's life total and force them to spend cards on the allies as opposed to spending them on attacking your life total directly. That might be what I anticipate it to look like, but I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. In terms of like just on top of that, like last kind of few things to remember, I just want to talk a little bit about like kind of my approach for tomorrow, what I'm looking at. I guess on today, depending on where you are in the world when this drops. But I'm just looking to open my cards, look for powerful interactions, the win conditions, as I say first, and just kind of build around those 2 things. And given the unknown nature of the format, I think I'll think about second cycle, but I'm not going to focus on it. Like I say, that's something that I think might come down the track. And I mean, I would prefer to play Draconic. I think it's more interesting for me, but I'll play Icelander in a pinch tomorrow if need be.
Absolutely.
Want to take us into the Google review, Brennan? That's it for, I guess, this approaching a new limited format pod. Our kind of preview to Uprising as we head towards our full limited set review next week, which of course we're always excited to do and brings robust discussion and some interesting grades. So we'll be back with that next week. But until then, Brennan, take us into the Google review and we'll sign off for the week.
All right. So this week's Google review comes from CanTud2. Again, these names scare me. But they say, how do you say you have the guts? How do you say you have the guts with the sauce sprinkled with the spice? You bring 3 Kano decks to the Pro Tour. Do you want to hear tips and tricks? This pod is for you. Do you want to know what heroes are owning in the meta? This pod is for you. There's a question mark there. Do you want to know how to battle jet? Do you want to know how to battle jet lag? This pod is definitely not for you. Hayden is a freak of nature. No, I didn't say it. It's a pause for you. Everything flesh and blood. When you can't get enough of it is in this podcast. This is a must listen for any fab player from casual to pro. There are even tips on how to dye your hair in there somewhere. All right. Thank you, CanTud. Yeah, the jet lag, I I've said it before on the pod. I'll say it again. I can't recommend getting your advice. I'd recommend getting your advice anywhere else because Hayden, he's a freak of nature. The man can just not sleep. Yeah, it's true.
But
You're wild.
A little bit, but also I think I prep myself really well. Like I start to think about that time maybe like 1 or 2 days before I travel, and as soon as I get on that plane, like I'm on that time zone. That's just how it is. I change my watch, like I'm on that time zone. Make sure I try, and even if I can't really sleep on a plane, but I just like I try when it's time that I should sleep. But
Your validity kind of just went out the window after New York when you got delayed on your flight after not getting sleep, and then got delayed and delayed and delayed. And I think you like virtually didn't sleep for like 2-3 days. I don't even know.
And then I went to work, and then I dropped on for testing that night.
Yeah, I would have. Wow. Well, Hayden, why don't you tell them how to get the review featured on the podcast?
Please. RateThisPodcast.com/Arsenal Pass if you want to leave us a review for the podcast. Not only, of course, can you get your review read out, but they do help us a lot. They help us get, of course, like the kind of the algorithm up and get us noticed and just get the podcast out to more flesh and blood lovers, which is what we're trying to do. Otherwise, Brendan, that's kind of it for the week. Good luck this weekend in Vegas, Madrid, Sydney, wherever you may be going. Of course, Brendan, good luck to you in Vegas and the team. Looking forward to seeing how all of us go. Enjoy the Uprising World Premiere if you're playing, and if not, and you're just going to be kind of watching from a distance at home, enjoy the pre-release week next weekend if you get to it. Cracking boxes the week after, and I think this set is. I'm super fizzing, not just for the limited format, but I think Constructor's going to be interesting. But I think I don't want to speak too soon. I don't want to ruin it, but I think LSs have knocked it out of the park with this one. There's some amazing stuff here, and things like the art just continue to get better and better. So
yeah.
If you want to find us on Twitter, you can. Brendan is at BrendanAPG. I'm at Fian_Dale. We are in Fab Twitter. We talk all things there, share deck lists. I'll be sharing updates over the weekend and some photos and stuff. So be sure to drop by if you're interested. You can find us on YouTube, of course. We have the Arsenal Pass YouTube channel where we put up deck techs, gameplays, which we'll be getting back to soon. Limited videos, kind of reviews of limited sets, and of course that's next week. And then just like tips and tricks videos, things that kind of come out of the cycle that we want to put up that can kind of help with your flesh and blood game. And then of course, big thank you to all of our patrons. Our Patreon page has all of our deck guides when we put up those deck techs, full sideboard plans, etc., as well as our monthly additional podcast, which we just actually did on the Blitz kind of format and the team calling, and we did a bit of a video format this time. You can find all that good stuff up on patreon.com/Arsenal Pass. But until next week, Brendan, enjoy Uprising, and see you next.
Enjoy.